right, here we are. We're here with Ben Rogojan. I think I pronounced that terribly. We'll just say Ben, aka the Seattle Data Guy. And this is officially our first TDE podcast episode that we're streaming on YouTube. So super excited about that. And if you guys, aren't familiar with the data entrepreneurs, not familiar with me, I'm Shah, the Data Entrepreneurs. We are a community for data folks pursuing entrepreneurial ventures. So you think of your data analyst, data engineer, data scientist, etc. Just trying to build a business, maybe building a consultancy, building a product, posting content, etc. And that's kind of the interesting thing about entrepreneurship is that it has a million different manifestations, which is one of the goals of this podcast is to kind of give some visibility to all these different versions and possibilities of entrepreneurship. And the way we're doing that is through interviewing every data entrepreneur that we can find. And so Ben was right at the top of the list because if you're not familiar with Ben, he has a successful data consultancy. He's got big followings on LinkedIn, YouTube, X. He's got a newsletter. He's got a community that he's building with data consultants. So a lot of good stuff coming from Ben and a lot that we can learn from. So Ben, thanks for being here. Excited to talk.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shah. I appreciate it. Appreciate being here.
So I want to start at the beginning, and so we can just get a sense of the arc of your journey. So what got you into the data space originally? How did this all get started for you?
I think like let me just keep my chair. I think like a lot of people, probably somewhere in like 2014 or 2013, I read the article where the sexiest job in the world is going to be data science. And up until that point, like I had been taking classes. I'd taken some courses in epidemiology, and I was like, man, if only there was a way you could like mix these two more. And obviously, then you read about data science, and you're like, oh, okay, there is a thing, and let me learn more about that. So I started taking like courses in like bioinformatics and a couple other like areas where it felt more applied. And then eventually, I really was trying to push for data science roles. Didn't get one. Got kind of a role as an analyst at a hospital. Started doing a lot of work on like data warehouses, doing a lot of automation workflows, kind of learning about that space. And when I started looking for a new job, honestly, I just started like Googling my skill sets, going and being like SQL, Python, Java, automation, and just trying to find a role. And eventually found data engineering and found that was more of a space that I liked working in. So eventually kind of got a job in healthcare analytics at a startup. And then from there, eventually worked at Facebook for a little bit, for a few years, kind of same thing, data engineer, but the whole time consulting and helping companies kind of set up their end-to-end workflows, as well as like processes and people, and helping them kind of understand how data can impact their business.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is I was looking at your job history on LinkedIn, and I noticed that consulting started actually pretty early in your journey. Like you started your company pretty early on, like even before you were working at Meta. So like what was the story there? Like what did the early contracts look like for you as a freelancer?
Yeah, I honestly accidentally started consulting. When I was at the hospital, the turnaround kind of finance director that came and worked with our team, and he like learned very quickly. He's like, "Oh, you're like, you know how to program, you know how to do SQL. I occasionally do this kind of work, and I might need you somewhere." So I didn't think about it. I'm like, "Yeah, sure. If you ever need me, call me." And then like 6 months later, because he ended up leaving, and then 6 months after he left, he like sent me an email and said like, "I've got a project. Do you want to help out?" The very first project was just helping a company migrate from Access to SQL Server, because they were trying to run analytical queries on Access on 10 gigs of data, which at this point we probably all laugh at, right? 10 gigs of data is pretty small, even for your local computer to process at this point.
Yeah.
But back then, like Access was not having it, so that was like the first project. Is like first migrating it, and then after migrating it, building analytics on top of that. And I very quickly learned, like that very first like year consulting, I made about as much as I made at my full-time role. So I was like,
Wow.
oh, this is great, right? Like I can just do this and this will be the way I make money. The next year afterwards, I think I maybe made 2 or 5 or 10K. It couldn't have been over 10K.
Okay.
I could look back at my tax statements, but it was like, couldn't have been over 10K. And I was like, oh, like, once that project ended, there's nowhere else money is going to come from. So I had to very quickly figure out, okay, how am I going to keep, consulting work coming my way? And so that's when I really started creating content and getting more work in my direction.
So before we talk about content, like one thing that struck me about that story is how unpredictable, like you just kind of stumbled into it. It's
Yeah.
like you started this journey like, oh, I want to be a data scientist. You couldn't be a data scientist, so you became this analyst, and you were analyst, but you're doing all these like automation things and maybe things that we might expect a data engineer to do more. And then you just happen to meet this guy who happens to have a consulting business who, left the company. And so it's just really, I think that summarizes a lot of most people's careers. It's just unpredictable happenstance. One thing leads to another. But okay, so you had this great first year as a freelancer, not so much a great second year, and then you started making content. So, how did you? So I guess it seems like content was the main way you're getting clients, but like, what's kind of like, what did that look like, and how did you get clients in those early days?
Yeah, like there was another client that I got that was also a friend that wasn't too long after that. And slowly, as I was putting out content, people just started to reach out, generally around what I was writing about. Originally, I wanted to do more data science work,
Hmm.
but as I started writing more about data engineering, and as I started doing some of these projects, I just kept finding that like most of these projects that people wanted, even when they came in with the mentality that they're like, hey, we want a data science project. Like you go in, you're like, okay, you mean you've got a 90% data engineering project with this little ending, maybe of like basic data analytics that you need to put on top of that. And so that's when I even more pivoted into data engineering. So it's like, okay,
Oh, okay.
really, there's a big need here, and I'm like, if I can just answer it and become like the person in the space or one of the people in the space that people look to, like that can be super valuable. And so that's really where I was like, okay, let me double down into that type
Yeah.
of content. And I've written a ton on both on my blog, and then I think, I don't know if you've got some further questions in there, because I don't want to talk too much, because I could go deeper into like content and specific spaces I went.
Yeah, we can definitely come back. So you were talking about like making content and stuff, but during this time you're still working at Meta, is that right?
Yeah. So basically, I was working at a healthcare startup too first, and I was doing content. Actually, I like
Okay, even
came
earlier.
across Medium. I think 2017 was when I was first putting out a ton of art.
Okay, okay.
I actually had another one of those moments where I was like, maybe this is gonna be the thing. I wrote this Medium article back in like 2017, and this was back when Tech Lead was still, I think, people were like, yeah, Tech Lead, he's funny.
He's the guy.
Now obviously we have a different mentality, but so I like wrote this article in very much a Tech Lead fashion of like joking around
Mm.
about like 7 effective habits of programmers, where it was all just
Oh, cool.
purely satire. And I think that article made me like $6,000. And I was like, well, if I just
Wow.
do this like over, I can just write like 4 articles a month that do this, and I'll be set. Um, I quickly found out that doesn't work unless you
Okay.
really have to like commit to that bit, which I'm just like, I don't want to keep
Right.
writing like this. That was funny once. I like writing things that are helpful, not necessarily satirical, but it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a funny thing. So yeah.
So you're making content, you're working full time, and then you're doing some side gigs with the consulting stuff. At what point did you make that decision to be like, okay, I can go all in on the consulting and the content? Like, what did you need to see before making that leap?
I think there's a few things that I needed to see. One was I started hating my life, because I was like getting like 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night, which for
Mm,
people, it's fine, but like after like 3 4 hour nights or 4 4 hour nights, you just start feeling it. And I also realized I was doing about like 120 to 160 hours a
mm,
month of consulting. And I think the last thing that kind of like really put the nail in the coffin, even though I'd already kind of made the decision, it just helped, was when I got in a LinkedIn message from a hiring manager, like a director of engineering from Netflix. And they were like, hey, do you want to work for Netflix? And I was like, well, if I'm getting like Netflix to at least like reach out to me directly, and this isn't a recruiter,
mm.
I will have an option to fall back on, right? Like I clearly
Yeah.
have something that I could come back to in a couple of years if I really wanted. And so that kind of gave me the confidence. Like I already had enough business in my that was kind of built for maybe the next 6 months or so. I was getting more leads, and then I was already having also some traction like with possible future jobs. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
options. I won't be broke anytime soon. So
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that's one of the like having this safety net, like that's the thing that kind of stuck out to me. And that's one of the things that I feel is great about having this skill set right now, like being a data person, like understanding AI, ML, like just I bundle all these things together because they're entangled. But it's such a in-demand skill set right now that I feel like it's kind of like entrepreneurship on easy mode because you could try and fail for 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, and you probably won't have a lot of trouble finding another job, just because so many people are looking for these skills.
yeah, and so many people are looking for answers to these problems. Like when you think about consulting, people, I think some people are nervous with the current landscape of the data world, and they're like, well, AI take over my job. And as a consultant, the more you can kind of help companies, because like you're not the only person dealing with those feelings, right? Like directors,
Mhm.
CEOs, all these people are dealing with those same feelings. And the more you can kind of be a whatever you want to call it, a guiding light in that kind of what feels like choppier waters,
Yeah.
the more valuable you become as a consultant. So yes, you can be technically good, which is good, but like the more you can also have like just like a confidence and ability to kind of see through the noise
Mhm.
and provide some clarity for people, I think is also super, super valuable
Yeah.
in this world.
So you left Meta, and then what happened? Like, what did that transition, like the early days of that transition, look like?
Yeah, I mean, I left Meta. I want to say it was December 17th. I think it was 2021 or 2020. I don't remember. I think it might have been 2020. So basically the end of the year. So the next year, January started off not crazy busy, but then I just immediately started picking up again and got pretty busy. I don't know. I pretty much immediately found work.
Yeah.
Because you have more time to put out content, you have more time to do everything, you have more time to network with people. I think that's the other thing that happened was like I was just connecting with more people, whether it was VCs, whether it was different people in the data space. You just have suddenly more time and what feels like more freedom because you don't feel as restricted. I think that was the biggest thing. Is like it was like a weight was lifted, right? Because up
Okay.
until I was just
Yeah.
constantly stressed, constantly like thinking, I'm like, how am I going to get promotion at Facebook while also trying to do all this consulting work, like and not get fired? Like, how do I balance all of this?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you just realize you got to let go of things.
Mm.
If you can, like if you've got all those things, if you can let go of one, it's like that makes it so much easier to just focus on the more important thing.
Yeah. And so were you getting all of your clients through just content creation? People read an article or, maybe saw a LinkedIn post and would DM you, or were you doing other strategies like, I don't know, posting on Upwork or going on Upwork or maybe doing some outreach strategies?
No, I was not doing Upwork. It's either referrals, network, or content. I'm not a huge person that does sales. I'm now putting some effort into it just because I'm more curious than anything else. Like, does it change
Hmm.
anything if you do it? But overall, I think what's interesting is it helps sometimes level the playing field if you have a sheer amount of content and confidence in your space because you've given so much to the community that when people think
Yeah.
like going to solve my problem, you become a little more top of mind, which is what kind of my goal was when I created some of that content. A lot of my
Yeah.
content really honestly meant to be something I wish would have existed more of when I was, getting into the space, but some of
Yeah.
it like, clearly meant to be targeting decision makers and people who are like probably looking to answer questions that are like, hey, what tool do I pick or how do I set up a team or something of that nature.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. That's exactly kind of the same approach that I've been taking as well. I mean, since the beginning, it's been make content that would have been helpful to a past version of myself. But like now that I have to, unfortunately make some money, some of the content has been more strategic and like for a particular audience, like a customer or a small to medium sized business operator or something like that. Um, the Okay, so I really want to talk about content creation because that seems like the core of your like marketing strategy, like how you're getting clients. So you're making a tremendous amount of content. Like, how do you approach it? How do you manage to keep up with everything while kind of balancing all the other aspects of what you're up to?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't always keep up. Like, sometimes I'll, like, let my YouTube videos slide, or maybe I don't put out as many articles on my blog, but I generally try to keep my Substack pretty consistent. But even there, like, what's been helpful is, now that I'm at a certain size, some people want to share their articles on MySpace. So recently, you might have seen, I think Daniel Beach put out an article or 2 articles on Databricks, and
Nice.
it's been helpful in that way too, just because it's a good trade, I think, for everyone, where someone gets tons of exposure, and then you also get a week off, which is really nice, because sometimes you're just like, I have nothing, or like, I've been traveling a lot this summer, and it's like, I just don't have time,
Hmm.
and I need to focus more on client work than maybe putting out content constantly.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of figure out where you ebb and flow, and where you have time for things.
Hmm.
Generally, in terms of process, like, my current process is generally like, let me test out, like, I'm interested in a subject, or I think there's something worth talking about. I'll test an idea out on LinkedIn and be like, hey, are people interested in this subject? Like, if I poke the bear, do people come back at me? Like, what are their thoughts on these topics? And that's been helpful to, like, get discussions going,
Yeah.
get people kind of talking about something. I'm like, okay, yes, people care about the subject. Let me, like, dig into this even more, and that's kind of been some parts of my kind of approach to this, overall. So yeah. And then usually I'll write, like, a longer article.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll into a video too. So yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. I feel, it's like sparking, making me think of my own, like my own process. I feel like I realized that LinkedIn's a good way to test ideas a little late. Um, but yeah, so you'll post on LinkedIn, and then maybe you'll turn into a longer form article, and maybe that turns into a video. I assume it's not such a linear process all the time, or is it always like that? You just go, okay, LinkedIn, blog, video. So what are some other versions of this trajectory?
Yeah, it's definitely not always that linear. That's definitely, like, one. And even sometimes I'll, like, post something and I'm curious now, and then I won't write about it for a few weeks, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, sometimes it's just a topic that I really want to write about, and I'm like, you know what, I want to dig into this. Maybe it's something that I personally just want to research, and sometimes it's just, know, you're like, I want to target a certain audience. I'm like, I would like to work with a certain client. Maybe if I write a few articles in
Mm.
the space, it'll kind of entice people to ask more questions.
And when you were talking earlier about, you kind of find these ebbs and flows of like the consulting and the content, and try to find like where everything fits together. Um, I guess, what do you think have been some of the biggest challenges of balancing these two things together? Because I feel like content creation and consulting are like fundamentally different things. Like, content creation is like, no one distract me, no one interrupt me, I'm just focused in writing. While consulting is answering emails, writing contracts, taking calls, like all these like quick, just checkbox kind of things. So I feel like there's a tension there. I know, like, what have been kind of the challenges of balancing those two?
Yeah, I do try to, as much as I can, schedule my life a little bit. Like, I'm
Mm,
not always the best at following it, but, like, I recently put out an article on, like, my consulting newsletter about this, where, like, I try to put most of my meetings and my content creation in the morning, and then I try to do more of my consulting and maybe some deep work if you're doing more programming work or something of that nature, in the afternoon, as much as I can.
mhm.
But yeah, so that's generally my biggest thing, because yeah, like, otherwise you just get so pulled from one direction to another. Maybe you wrote something and you're like, what am I writing? You read it again and you're like, I don't know what I just wrote. And so I think that's part of it. I think another part is just trying to figure out how to apply it to different mediums. Like, you're like, okay, I've got my YouTube video and I want to make an article about this, and I want to make a LinkedIn post.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it. I think the other part is just sometimes dealing with the fact that not all your content will always do as well as you want, and that's sometimes okay. Sometimes it's okay that your article only gets seen by half the amount of people you're used to, because it's the half that maybe you're targeting, right? Like,
yeah,
just that you're not targeting uh,
right.
the same audience, and you're still making content for that whatever it would be, 1,000 or 2,000 or 500 or 200 people that really need to see that content, versus trying to just appease the masses.
It's funny. I saw something somewhat recently from Alex Hormozy. I don't know if you follow his stuff, but he was kind of really hammering home like you don't need a big audience to be a successful entrepreneur. And he like was talking about this lady who had like 1,000 followers on Instagram, but she was making like $1 million a year, like through her business. So it's like it's really interesting when you're a content creator and you have a business because it's not all about the metrics like views and reach and stuff like that. There's like this whole other dimension to the effort that makes it a lot more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's often sometimes the miss that some people have coming into like, oh, I want to do content creation. Because there's like, you can do content creation if that's like, and that's like your goal, right? You want
Yeah,
to be Logan Paul or something where like all you really do is content and like you just get basically advertisers and
yeah,
that's how you make money. And then there's people who are like, no, I want a business on the other side. And the content is merely, sometimes it's things that I want to share because I like the space. Other times it's because I need clients or I would like to speak to my clients and really interact with
yeah,
them to work with me. And so, yeah, I do think there's something there where it's like, look, it's okay if you don't have a million followers. It's not necessarily worth it. In fact,
right,
I prefer being smaller, right? Like I dislike the idea of like, I can't imagine having 10 million people following me. Like, that would be so stressful, and I have no desire for it. I'd rather have, a few thousand people that really like the stuff that I put or
yeah,
challenge me if they feel like I'm not putting out good stuff, and care,
right,
that I'm putting out versus, people who are just there because it's entertaining and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
a little less about me.
Having a more meaningful connection with your audience. Quick tangent that's personally interesting to me. But how do you handle? Because I assume a ton of people reach out to you about sponsorship deals and all this kind of stuff. Like, how do you handle all these things? Because you've got a business on the other side of the content, so you probably want a lot of the attention to get pushed toward that. Do you do any of the sponsorship stuff? And when you do, if you do, like, how do you balance it?
Yeah, I'll do sponsors from here and there. My newsletter occasionally will take a sponsor. I try not to make it the thing that I'm chasing. So I put numbers on there that like you're gonna have to want to sponsor is basically the way I view it. Is like, and that's my thing. It's like, look, my newsletter is not meant to make me millions of dollars through sponsorships. If you want to sponsor, great. But I'm not going to take a ton. At the same thing with my YouTube videos. If you see my YouTube videos, I think I have a sponsor every like 10 or so. I could spend plenty of time chasing down one and then make, whatever, a few grand per video or something, or it's just not the goal.
Yeah,
So yeah, you'll see it every once in a while, but it's definitely hasn't been my focus. I'd rather play for the companies. Like I'm more interested in possibly playing a bigger role for companies. Like I've taken advisor roles, which I think have been more interesting to me, where
hmm,
you feel like you have a bigger impact versus just this
yeah,
one kind of layer of ad. Like basically, I'm just an advertiser. I really like that idea where it's like I would rather be part of something bigger versus just being kind of this throwaway piece.
yeah,
Going to be kind of an advertising component.
yeah. That's really cool. So I want to kind of transition the conversation, kind of more forward looking and outward looking. So for people that are on a similar journey or interested in a similar journey as maybe they're working as a data engineer right now and they want to kind of go off, do their own thing, maybe start a consultancy or just start freelancing or something like that. Any advice that you would offer a person in those shoes?
Yeah, I think one thing that I usually tell people is you got to figure out what your way to land clients is going to be, and it doesn't have to be the same way I've done it, right? Like I say, content. One, it took me a while to get to the point where content worked, but I think part of that is because I wasn't doing it intentionally. I was just kind of like, here's stuff I'd want to read.
Hmm.
Now when I talk to people about content, I talk more about marketing funnels and like, like how do you go from like the awareness to like getting down to desire to going down to these different layers of content, and that's how I think about it more. So there's that aspect of it, whereas like you could put out content forever and none of it could ever speak to the client, or you can start being very specific. But that's in marketing. You can also do sales if that's what you want to do. Most consultants I've talked to start by networking. Like they just go back through their network and talk to people. They talk to their families. They talk to everyone. It's not just coworkers. You can go through
Yeah.
people that their softball league, wherever they have connections. Or you get like vendor partnerships. Vendor partnerships tend to be harder because you have to be giving them
Yeah.
as well. So you do need to have some stuff going already. But yeah, you got to figure out where they're going to come from. That's the biggest thing. Because once you solve that problem, you kind of have a business, right? Like then you can deal with all the other things. Because I think some people come to me and they're like, "Oh, how much should I charge?" And I'm like, "Well, are you getting clients yet? Because if you're not getting clients, it's not a meaningful discussion.
Yeah.
Really figure out, how do I get a ton of prospects in my pipeline? Because then you can start playing around with how much do I charge? Because
Yeah.
you can be like, "Oh, I charge this much. I charge this much." You can start figuring out what people say yes to, what they say no to, what they value, how they like going through a process. So yeah.
Or they're very focused on like making their website or coming up with the name of their consultancy, and they don't have a single customer, or they haven't even talked to a single customer yet.
Exactly. I think you referenced Alex earlier, and I think he's got a good point. He had a funny line. I don't know if he took it from somewhere or if it's his, but he's like, a lot of people spend too much time getting rich in Excel, which I thought was a really funny way of
Oh, I
sit
see.
there and you're like, if I make
Yeah.
$5,000 a client and I can get 3 clients a month and whatever it took, that's not how it happens. Like
Yeah.
it's not going to work that perfectly. You're going to have to figure out like who your client is. You have to go talk to a bunch of customers before even trying. Some people again will be lucky, but most people are going to have to do the rough grunt work of like
Right.
talking to a bunch of people, figuring out what the problems are, and trying to constantly pitch and repitch and
Yeah.
uh,
So kind of looking forward, and we're going to wrap it up and transition to the Q&A. But where's this all going for you? Like, what's kind of the long-term goals of Ben, the Seattle data guy, now living in Colorado?
Yes. Yep. Now in Denver. I think part of it is I do like consulting, so I hope it constantly is there. I would like to continue kind of moving up and solving bigger problems. I think that's generally my goal, is like, how do I solve the next big problem and help people strategically and go beyond just implementations of frame of like technology and go into like, okay, how do we set up teams? How do we, really drive value? Because you can play all day with infrastructure, but at a certain point, most of it kind of does what you need. And it really comes down to, okay, but now how do we make the data, impact the business in a way that they want to keep using this infrastructure, that they stop asking so much about like, oh, what does it cost in terms of like Snowflake or Databricks bill, right? And they start asking like, how do we do more? So I think that's generally been my focus. And then also, we talked about this before we started, like really build a community of like other consultants that, they have somewhere to go and ask some of the questions I had when I first started, or new questions. Maybe nowadays they have new questions, and share some perspective there, but also have like people that you can go to when you have maybe a bigger project that you can't compete with a slalom.
Right.
You're 2 or 3 people and you need 10, and you can go and find those people and make a little group.
Well, that's a great opportunity to plug your Circle community. We'll drop the link in the description after we upload. But let's open up for audience questions. I think I've gone on long enough with my questions. So if you guys have questions, feel free to drop it in the live chat. Post a comment or whatever it's called. And while you're doing that, I've got some pre-arranged questions that I've gathered from various secret sources from the community.
Nice.
So we'll while people are typing their questions in the chat, we'll go ahead with these. So the first one is, do you have any regrets about past choices? So I guess we talked a lot about your trajectory here. Anything you regret? Any mistakes?
I think I don't always tend to be that backward looking, at least not about that. I think everything has always felt like it's worked out. So, sometimes it's okay to take a risk. I think, especially like, I say that very carefully because people have responsibilities, people have
Yeah.
very life uh, things that go on. So for me, it was okay to take those risks because I constantly would try to take them at times when it was okay, right? Like, it was like, look, I can take this risk. There's almost no risk to me taking this, other than like lost income, working at a FANG or big tech. It's funny, actually. I've heard a lot of people ask me, what is a FANG these days? I'm like, oh, we're past FANG time. But yeah, so I don't think I have too many. Again, things tend to work out, and you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that. It's like if you're happy with where you're at, you can't really have any regrets, you know? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Ask for three pieces of advice to himself 10 years ago. So I guess, I don't know, maybe advice to a past version of yourself, maybe at different points, maybe when you were contemplating leaving Meta, maybe I don't know, trying to get your first clients and um, maybe some other key points in your journey.
Yeah, I think one bit of advice was probably network a little more, like just spend more time talking to people. I think it's always been like I've done it through marketing basically. Like I'm not naturally a person that like reaches out to people and like, "Oh, how can I help you?" Or like, "Can I get to know you?" So in some ways, maybe the marketing kind of just did it itself, but like I do wish I would have spent more time trying to figure out how to do that well, just naturally. Although I was trying to remember, I think it's Naval who like said like if you build something good enough, you don't need a network, people will come to you. So there might be some little truth there, but I do think it's important. What was I thinking of the next one? I really wish I'd and this is something I still wanna do better, which is, like, just focus more on things, right? Like, you
Mm,
don't do a million things well. You can just do one thing well, or 2 things well. So I think that's another thing. It's just, don't let yourself get too distracted by everything going on,
yeah,
pick a few things and really try to hammer it home, and
yeah.
do it. Um
It's funny that you say that. A couple weeks ago, um, we had someone lead a workshop. Greg Head. He has a group called Practical Founders, and it's all about bootstrapped SaaS companies and whatnot. And I was talking to him a few months ago, and he was talking about that there are two key phases in the life of an entrepreneur. He called it like the ADD phase and the OCD phase. And he said, like, the ADD phase is like you're trying a million businesses, you're doing a bunch of things, but then eventually you kind of find that one thing that really works and you go all in on that. And he calls that the OCD phase. So, you know, I was kind of feeling like how what you're describing. It's like I'm doing way too many things. I need to kind of find that one thing and focus. But then after hearing that from Greg, I feel like it felt normal to be doing a million things. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that's just the era I'm in right now. It's just part of the process. And when that one thing comes around, then it'll be time to transition. Sorry, I interjected when you're
No,
kind of
no.
getting to that last piece of advice.
No, I like that because I think there is something to, like, testing out a million things. You learn a lot about
Yeah.
there's certain things I still don't know a lot about, but, there's a lot of things that now I feel more comfortable with. Again, talking about marketing, talking about even a little bit in sales and things like that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it just comes through just doing a million things. Trying to think about a third piece of advice. Hmm, um, what else would I tell past me?
Post more
Oh, I
memes
would
on
have started
LinkedIn.
doing YouTube sooner. I think I would have
Okay.
become a YouTuber sooner. Yeah, I mean, like, I kept trying, I just never felt comfortable with it,
Yeah.
and, yeah, I think I finally swallowed it in, I wanna say 2021 or something, and I was like, "Alright, we're doing this, like, we gotta commit,
Yeah.
gotta make it happen," and so I think that would've been something.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like a lot of people will ask me about like, oh, how do I get started on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, I bought all this equipment or, they're trying to come up with a name or like they're planning out their first 10 videos. They're trying to optimize a thumbnail before they've even posted one video. And it's
Yeah.
like, just post that first video. It's going to be your worst video and it's just
You
going
don't
to
want a
get
lot of
better.
people to see it.
Yeah.
Like, fun fact, you probably don't want a ton of people to see your first video. You just want it's for you. Your first, like, 10 videos are for you and for you to get
Yeah.
better and for you to cringe at, and,
Hmm.
like, my first few videos where I started showing my face, um, I used well, I'm still using my laptop camera, but I mean, this was like YouTube. Like that was the only thing was my face. I had like terrible editing. Like I think I was just using my like whatever earphone microphone, like, and I got a few hundred people watching. I'm like, well, if I have a few hundred people watching, like, what would happen if I like tried a little bit harder?
Yeah.
And so yeah.
So I guess this is a great opportunity for everyone in the audience to, if they want to cringe, they can go to Ben's YouTube channel and watch his first 10 videos. And I
I don't
guess
know.
you guys can
I'm
do the
curious if
same for
I
me.
might have hidden them away, so
Oh, okay.
you may or may not be able to find them. But I have some older videos that are like I was talking about ARIMA modeling and a lot of things.
Mm,
You don't see my face. It's just me. Actually, someone just recently, which again, this video was either 2018 or 2017, and they were like teaching a class on something with public health. And they were I think they used my video on confounding variables in the class. And I'm like, I put that video out like 7 years ago. That's so funny that it's now getting used.
and
Yeah.
you made it a secret video and they found it somehow?
No, this one definitely I think you can find it.
Oh, okay.
It was funny. No, there's a lot of videos that are old there, but I think some of the more there's some videos where I'm like, it's just I don't want people to like come to my channel and feel like that's what they should expect.
Mm,
Although sometimes it's interesting. I've done this with like I remember there's like one workout person where if you watch their like old videos, they were terrible, and then watch your new ones and they're so good, and you're like,
mhm.
kind of interesting seeing
Yeah,
the change. So
watching the journey.
yeah.
All right, let's see. We've got one more pre-canned question. Let's see. Can you ask him if he does any ML ops? So this was an interesting question because I know you're a data engineer, but do you find yourself kind of bleeding into the ML engineering side of things as well?
I haven't had too many ML ops needs recently for any of my clients. I had a client that needs basically like what would you call it? Just a rules engine, but even that's like it's not really a machine. It's not at all a machine learning thing.
Right.
It's really just a rules engine. You know, a slightly maybe more handwritten decision tree, really. Um, but yeah, I haven't had to like implement something where you like have a model, then you retrain that model, then you repost it, then you know take some new data, retrain that model, and whatever. I
Mhm.
did. There was an interesting article that I had someone from I think it was Riot Games. I want to say it was Riot Games come in and tell us how they deal with their models and how they deploy it. And I thought it was hilarious because they just use I think Airflow to kind of do what I just said, which is like every night or every like month they just retrain the model. And they just have Airflow like
Mhm.
new data rerun it. I was like, you just use Airflow? Like, really? Like, that's the choice? Okay. Like, I always assumed it was fancier or something more than that. But,
Yeah.
you know, for some people, if it works, it works.
Yeah, I feel like that it was the same thing for me. Like even before I got my first data science role, like my expectation was, oh, Toyota, they're gonna have really fancy, sophisticated models, and then I go and join the company, and everything's linear regression. So it's like I feel like we tend to like over before we like do it and see and have that experience, we always overcomplicate it for whatever reason. So that's an interesting quirk of human nature.
Yeah. I, I feel like you kind of have to go, like, speaking of phases, they brought the, ADHD and OCD phase. I feel like that's something similar with getting good at things is like you start,
Mhm.
one, nothing, then like everything sort of, but like not applied. So you're like, oh, this is what we're gonna do. And then you
Yeah,
start coming back to it applied, and you kind of like, oh, it's less than I thought, but it's more about like just executing really well on it than anything else, which is also really hard, right? Like it's
yeah,
one thing to say like, oh yeah, you just do it. It's like, well, it's hard to execute really, really well. Either because it's boring sometimes it just
yeah.
requires a lot of the same like discipline and doing the right thing over and over again, which you might not find exciting, um, or because having to put code out into production is hard. It's
Mhm,
a
mhm.
thing.
So let's see. The chat is empty. I
Woo!
guess maybe we answered all the questions in the interview that people had. So we'll have that optimistic look on it. So I guess I feel like I covered everything part of the plan. Is there like how? Let's see. Cool topics, easy chat, bot empty. Okay. Um, so how can people keep up with you? You're doing a lot of things, and I'm sure there are many people that are inspired by your journey and they want to kind of follow in your footsteps. So what's the best way people can keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, like you can follow me on Substack if you look up Seattle Data Guy. I have content there. LinkedIn often post a decent amount, and then YouTube. I think I'm starting to hopefully find a new groove. Like I've been posting about once every 2 weeks, but
Nice.
trying to figure out some what makes sense there. Like what kind of content I really want to put out there longer term. But yeah, you can find you just look up Seattle Data Guy, and I'll probably show up somewhere. I do need to figure out a way to like better show off what I'm doing, because like even with the consulting stuff that I've been trying to help people do, I don't have like some people be like, oh, you're doing that. And I'm like, oh, that's right. I really only share about it on LinkedIn, and unless you kind of follow me, it's just there's a lot of stuff. And going back to focus, right? Like people perceive you in a certain way, and if you have a million things going, some people have a hard time figuring out what you're about. So
well, I guess the moral of the story is if you have like whatever social media platform you're on, Ben's on it, so pick your pick your favorite.
Probably, yes.
All right, so with that, I'd like to thank Ben for taking the time to do this interview. He's super busy, but generous enough to come talk about his experience and share some of his insights. Next week, we've got a workshop event, which is basically a talk. We've got Tarun, who's going to talk about how to 10x your business with AI. Very sexy title. So you probably don't want to miss that. So with that, I'll thank you again, Ben, and thanks for everyone in the audience. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, Shaw. Thanks, everyone.